Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's conference. At that time, to ask a question, press star 1 on your phone and record your name at the prompt. This call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Yvette Riddick. Thank you. You may begin.
Hello, everyone. Have a good afternoon, I hope. My name is Yvette Riddick, and I'm the Director of the Division of Policy and Training for the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement. This is Session 1 of the Intergovernmental Forums Training, and we are really excited that we're able to offer this to you in addition to other training that we will do in the future in this series. And today we're going to begin the training on the revised Intergovernmental Forums that were published earlier this year and to answer your questions. And we'll give you some information regarding the forms revision process that starts on the forms. We will be stopping periodically to answer your questions. If we cannot answer your questions today, we will answer them later. I would like to introduce the people who are on the panel. First, we have Debbie Ward, and she works for the Division of Policy and Training, the same division that I work in, and she's a training specialist. She was part of the work group that revised and provided input on the new Intergovernmental Forum, and she will provide you with additional information about the work group and how it was established in just a little bit. She has been with the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, OCSE, as a federal employee for 6 years, and before that, she worked for OCSE as a contractor for 3 years. She works in policy now, but she also worked in the Division of Federal Systems and the Division of State and Tribal Systems, so she has a lot of experience. Our next speaker is Jeanette Savoy, and Jeanette Savoy now works for the Center for the Support of Families. She was with the Colorado 4D program's Interstate Network for 16 years as a supervisor of the Colorado Central Registry. So we are really happy to have someone with that much state experience working with us. Along with supervising the unit, her duties there included training state and county employees, maintaining intergovernmental policies and procedures, and troubleshooting intergovernmental cases. She's a frequent speaker at national child support conferences and is recognized nationally for her expertise related to intergovernmental child support issues. She also was one of the key members of our work group in providing input on the new, or I should say, revised Intergovernmental Forum. Last but not least, Bill Meyer is our moderator for today. He's an OCSE program specialist, and he's in our Region 9 office, which is in San Francisco, California. He joined OCSE in 2015. Prior to that, he worked in the Missouri Child Support Program for 24 years, and of those 24 years, 16 of them were with the Missouri Policy Unit. He has a significant knowledge of intergovernmental case processing, and he was part of the Intergovernmental Forums Work Group as well. He will be facilitating our question and answer segment. I just want to thank all three of them. They all have really a lot of intergovernmental knowledge, and I'm very, very pleased to be working with them. Now I'm going to turn it over to Debbie to go over the agenda for today's session and the training series. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvette, and hello, everyone. As Yvette said, I'm Debbie Ward, and I'm going to be doing the first part of the training. Then I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette to go over the forms. As far as the training, we will be providing 4 90-minute training sessions over the next several months. Each session will be from 2 to 3:30 Eastern Time, except for Session 3, which is from 2:30 to 4 Eastern Time. Today for Session 1, we're going to review the objectives of the training course, give you some background, discuss the general changes that were made across the forms, and review the first 4 forms individually. And that will be the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form, the Personal Information Form for UIFSA Section 311, Transmittal 1 Initial Request, and the Transmittal 1 Initial Request Acknowledgment. And then we're going to talk a little bit about implementation timeframes. In Session 2 on April 25th, we'll cover 4 additional forms. The Transmittal 2, which is subsequent action, Transmittal 3, the request for assistance/discovery, letter of transmittal requesting registration, and the uniform support petition. In Session 3 on May 16th, we'll cover 2 additional forms, the general testimony and the request for change of support payment location pursuant to UIFSA Section 319. We have 2 forms on that training session, but they're really big forms. So in Session 4 on June 27th, we'll cover the rest of the individual forms, and that's the Declaration in Support of Establishing Parentage, Notice of Determination of Controlling Order, and the Child Support Locate Request. Then we're going to do a wrap-up. So we also wanted to let you know that the slides and the notes will be posted on the OCSE website for your use after training, for you to do additional trainings if needed. And we hope to have that up within a week of this training. So on to Session 1. So we're going to stop at the end of this section and after each of the forms to answer questions. So we'll limit this time to about 5 minutes to allow for completion of the training session, and that should give us enough time at the end to answer your questions also. After we finish the training, we'll open it up for questions on all the material. So if you don't get your question answered after the section, please hold it until the end. Okay, if you'll notice, there's 2 ways to ask there's the Q&A that's on your screen is where we prefer you to ask questions. Please do not use the chat box because we can't capture the question if you use the chat box. So let's get started. The objective is to train you on how to use the revised intergovernmental forms. This training will allow for more accurate case processing, better communication among states on intergovernmental issues, and more accurate intergovernmental decision-making by both caseworkers and tribunals. So, why did we do all this work to revise the forms? The main reason is that the forms were outdated. We had not made major changes to the intergovernmental forms since the 1990s. Every 3 years, according to the Paperwork Reduction Act, which is PRA, all government forms need to be reviewed and reissued with a new renewal date. There are 2 steps in this process. The first step is to submit the forms for a 60-day public comment period. The submitting organization then considers any comments from the public and may revise the forms based on those comments. The second step is to submit the forms for renewal to the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. During this step, the public has 30 days to provide comments to OMB. At the end of this step, OMB approves the forms and provides a new renewal date. In 2013, during the PRA renewal process for the intergovernmental forms, OCSE received numerous substantive comments on the existing forms. In response, OCSE requested renewal of the intergovernmental forms without change. In order to have time to convene a federal-state work group to carefully analyze and address the comments and revise the forms for the next PRA cycle. OMB approved this renewal in May of 2014 with a new renewal date of February 28, 2017. So in 2014, OCSE convened a work group made up of state and federal staff with a mandate to consider both the 2013 comments and the changes needed due to the enactment of UIFSA 2008 by all states. The members of the group represented at least 11 states, and those states were both judicial and administrative. The work group met frequently for almost 2 years. The first task for the work group was to revamp all the forms and instructions. This led to the creation of some new forms. Once the initial changes were made in August 2015, OCSE submitted the proposed forms for the 60-day PRA public comment period. The work group reviewed all the comments received and made recommendations to OCSE. Next, OCSE submitted the revised intergovernmental forms for the 30-day comment period and OMB approval. During this period, OCSE made changes to a few forms based on comments. On December 31st, 2016, OMB approved the changes to the intergovernmental forms and issued a new renewal date of December 31st, 2019. During the entire process, OCSE and the work group kept in mind several key themes from the initial set of comments. Those were protecting personally identifiable information, and for the rest of this session, we're going to refer to that as PII. Many comments reflected state practices that were court rules in many states required that 40 agencies and other petitioners redact certain PII, such as Social Security number, before filing the intergovernmental forms with a court or tribunal. Other comments and experiences of the work group members raised concerns of identity theft, as many courts allow public access to court filings. Advancements in technology and communication was another thing that we considered. Another one is family dynamics. For example, the forms didn't take into account same-sex parents. And finally, the forms did not include email address or cell phone information, which hinders communication. We added these things to bring the forms up to date. As you can tell, the forms revision process was well thought out and inclusive. The work group had state participation from all major geographic regions, numerous OCSE divisions, and the HHS Office of General Counsel. The work group recommended new or modified language that impacts most forms. We're going to cover these overarching changes first and then begin reviewing each form separately in this and subsequent training sessions. The most challenging issue for the work group was managing PII. Specifically, the challenge was how to strike a balance between ensuring the forms contained sufficient information for the responding agency and tribunal to work the case and protecting the PII. The proposed 2015 intergovernmental forms released for public comment included a single new PII form designed to manage PII separately rather than displaying PII on all the forms. However, public commenters made clear that one form would not resolve all the issues related to PII in intergovernmental cases. After extensive analysis and discussion, the work group recommended creating two new forms to manage PII. The first form is the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form, which contains fields for all of the PII elements. A responding child support agency may require in order to open and take action on an intergovernmental case. This form is used exclusively in 40 cases and by 40 agencies and is not filed in a tribunal or shared with the parties in the case. In contrast, the Personal Information Form for UIFSA Section 311 contains the specific PII elements that UIFSA Section 311 requires to be filed with the tribunal and provided to the respondent. The form safeguards this information by providing it on a separate form rather than on all the forms related to the case. The specific PII data elements on this form include name, residential addresses, and Social Security numbers for both parties, and the name, sex, resident, address, Social Security number, and date of birth of each child in the case. We'll address these forms in more detail later on in this session. There is an instruction at the top of the UIFSA Section 311 form that alerts the tribunal that it contains sensitive information and should not be placed in a file available to the general public. So the revised intergovernmental forms have other features to safeguard information, such as the intended recipient. To raise awareness about safeguarding PII, where appropriate, the standard notice you see on this slide was added to all the forms so that anyone who might receive a form unintentionally would be aware that the information should not be used for any other purpose. Also, every form and form instruction includes encryption requirements as shown on the slide. This provides notice that anyone who transmits a form electronically must use encryption methods compliant with the Federal Information Processing Standard. Another overarching change across all the forms is the addition of a note section at the bottom of the header of each form. This section may include one or all of the following checkboxes as applicable: the non-disclosure finding/affidavit attached. UIFSA Section 312 allows a party to allege in an affidavit or pleading under oath that the health, safety, or liberty of a party or child would be jeopardized by disclosure of specific identifying information. In this case, that information must be sealed and may not be disclosed to the other party or the public unless the tribunal, after hearing, orders disclosure of information that the tribunal determines to be in the interest of justice. The second thing you might see on that header is under the note section, this form sent through EDE. EDE stands for Electronic Document Exchange, and it is a federal system for interstate communication and intergovernmental cases. The third checkbox, this request or information sent through CESNET. CESNET stands for Child Support Enforcement Network, and it's also a federal system for interstate communication. Both CESNET and EDE checkboxes in the notes section indicate to the receiving agency that the forms or information have already been sent via a CESNET or EDE transaction. One change we made in the response to comments on the 2015 proposed form set was to customize the notes section of the individual form to include only those checkboxes which are applicable to the form. For example, if a CESNET transaction is not available for the form, that checkbox will not be listed on the form. In addition to the notes section, the header on the revised forms are updated in several ways. First, the revised form no longer displays PII related to the case, since that information is now available on the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form or the Personal Information Form for UIFSA Section 311. Where appropriate, the header on the revised forms specify whether one of the two new PII forms could be or must be included along with the form. For example, the Transmittal 1 includes an instruction in the heading, the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form must be attached, while the Transmittal 3 provides a checkbox in the heading next to the form, the same form title, allowing the state the option to provide the form. Also, the revised header across forms provides consistent terminology. For example, the forms retain initiating and responding agency or tribunal consistent with UIFSA and federal regulations and policy with two exceptions. The first exception is the Child Support Enforcement Transmittal 3, which uses requesting and assisting agency terminology to more accurately describe roles in limited service cases. And the Child Support Agency request for change of payment location pursuant to UIFSA Section 319 form, which uses requesting and order issuing agency and tribunal as appropriate for that context. We'll talk more about these two forms later in this section. Also, the term FIPS code has been replaced by the term locator code. OCSE made this terminology change several years ago in order to be more inclusive of all child support entities such as tribal or international. Another overarching change to the forms is that the term parentage has replaced paternity throughout all the forms. The main reason for this change is to be consistent with UIFSA 2008. The parentage terminology is gender neutral and reflects cases involving same-sex couples or families using assisted reproductive technology. The form now reflects terminology for the person's role in the case rather than the mother or the father. This allows the forms to be used by either party and for cases where there are two mothers or two fathers. Where the gender of a parent or party is needed, a checkbox for other was added for individuals who do not identify as male or female. The gender field for children remains unchanged as male or female. We will discuss these changes in more detail when we look at the Declaration in Support of Establishing Parentage form or other forms. Another overarching change is that the verification section on certain forms is now a declaration section, as UIFSA 2008 no longer requires a verified petition. Rather, the document is signed under penalty of perjury. Accordingly, the form no longer requires a signature under oath before a notary public. The form that contains the declaration section, those forms are the letter of transmittal requesting registration, the general testimony, the uniform support petition, and the declaration of support of establishing parentage. Contact information, such as email addresses and cell phone numbers, were added to reflect current communication methods. On a related note, there was considerable discussion about requiring that caseworkers direct numbers or emails on the form, particularly the transmittal. The work group understands that in some states, workers do not have or are precluded from sharing a direct phone line. Ultimately, the work group opted to reference a direct phone number on the forms as case processing is improved when caseworkers in both states can be in direct contact to resolve issues. Two forms have revised titles which impact the references to them on other forms. The Declaration in Support of Establishing Paternity is now the Declaration in Support of Establishing Parentage, and the registration statement is now the Letter of Transmittal Requesting Registration. These revised titles mirror the language in UIFSA. So we have 4 new forms. We've already mentioned the forms that manage PII, the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form, and the Personal Information Form for UIFSA Section 311. The other new forms are the Child Support Enforcement Transmittal 1 Initial Request Acknowledgment. Now, the acknowledgment used to be part of the Transmittal 1, and we've broken that out into its own form. And the Child Support Agency requests for change of support payment location pursuant to UIFSA Section 319. We'll talk about detail of these forms during our training sessions. As you recall on slide 10, we discussed the various checkboxes that may be under the notes section in the header, including references to EDE and CESNET. This slide displays common instructions that are on all the forms about communication and transmission methods for making 40 case requests and sending the information in the majority of 40 cases. However, if your state does not have a particular method, then find a method that your state does have. The recommended method for making requests or sending information to another state is a CESNET transaction. As we discussed earlier, if CESNET is not listed as an option on the form, then it cannot be used to convey any of the information provided on the form. After CESNET, EDE is the next preferred method for transmitting your request or information. Both your state and the receiving state must be using the EDE application to use this communication method. Since you cannot send a document via CESNET, supporting documentation should be sent through EDE whenever possible. If neither CESNET or EDE is available to your state or the receiving state, then use mail or fax to communicate your request. If certified copies are needed, send hard copies by mail. So instructions for a form are very important in filling out the form correctly. Read the instructions carefully as they are very different from the previous forms and provide important guidance. The instructions should also be available to the applicant and should be included if you're mailing the form to one of the parties.
Thank you, Debbie. We're going to stop briefly here and take a few questions, maybe for about 5 minutes. So I'd like the operator to open the line, please.
Thank you. We'll now open for questions. If you would like to ask a question, please press star one on your touch-tone phone. Make sure your phone is unmuted and record your name clearly when prompted. If you need to withdraw your question, you may press star two. Again, to ask a question, please press star one and record your name. It will take a moment for questions to come through. Please stand by.
And we'll certainly take an opportunity after the next review of the forms and at the end for additional questions if you have them, and there will be an opportunity to submit questions as well, written.
And I'm showing no questions in the queue at this time.
Okay.
Okay, so let's move forward. Hello, everyone. This is Jeanette. Let's get started looking at the revised forms, and we're first going to look at the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form. As we mentioned earlier, protection of PII received the most public comments during the 2014 forms renewal process. Commenters shared that some states redact PII from pleadings and supporting documents to protect the information from public access, and expressed concern that other states do not. Commenters also noted increased risk of identity theft. In response to these concerns, OCSE originally proposed a single PII form in 2015 and requested public comments. While there was strong support for protecting PII, commenters identified two separate needs for PII. The first is personal information required by the responding agency to open and provide services in intergovernmental cases. And the second is the information required to be provided to the tribunal and the opposing party under UIFSA Section 311. In response to these comments, and after lengthy work group discussions, OCSE determined that two forms were needed to address these separate purposes for PII. The Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form records information that the responding 4D agency needs to provide services in an intergovernmental case, but that may pose significant risk if disclosed inappropriately. It's used exclusively by 4D agencies and is intended to safeguard the privacy of individuals. The Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form is not intended to be filed with the tribunal or provided to the opposing party. The second form, the Personal Information Form for UIFSA Section 311, provides the information required by that section to be filed with the tribunal and provided to the other party. And we're going to talk more about that form in just a few minutes. Placing PII on separate forms, the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form and the Personal Information Form for UIFSA Section 311 eliminates the need to repeat personally identifiable information on most intergovernmental forms. As we look at each of the forms during this training, we will discuss when these forms must be included and when these forms are recommended. Let's look first at Section 1 on this slide of the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form. This section asks for basic case information, identifying the name and case or tribunal numbers of the initiating and responding jurisdictions. Note the use of jurisdiction rather than state. In general, the forms use the broader term jurisdiction to allow the forms to be used by non-state agencies, such as tribes, foreign countries, and even private attorneys when appropriate. Section 2 requests the information about the parties that the Child Support Agency will need to work the case effectively, such as names, addresses, and Social Security numbers. You'll note that in Section 2, the parent information is listed side by side, and there's space to include the information on the parent's relationship to the child, for example, mother or father, as well as the person's role in the case, obligee or obligor. The data on this form was previously on the Transmittal 1. Please fill out the form as completely as possible to assist the responding jurisdiction. The remaining parent information in Section 2 is continued on this slide. New information has been added, such as the employer FEIN and, if applicable, information known about incarceration. If the obligee is not the child or children's parent, Section 2 also provides space for information about the caretaker. Section 3 is used to provide information about the child or children for whom support is owed or being sought. There is room on the form to provide information for 3 children, but we are only showing the first child on this slide. The same information is required for each child listed. If there are more than 3 children involved, check the Additional Children's Information Attached box and attach the same information for each additional child. Other questions are included on this form that address parentage establishment, such as, was this a non-marital birth? If no, enter the date of marriage. And the term non-marital birth is now used instead of out-of-wedlock birth. If yes, this was a non-marital birth, then continue completing this section of the form for the child. If parentage has been established, check the next box and answer the following questions. Was this parentage establishment a paternity determination of fatherhood? Answer yes or no. This question is asked for the paternity establishment percentage, called PEP, reporting measure, and for audit purposes. This checkbox for paternity determination of fatherhood is important for intergovernmental case processing. For the purpose of the data reliability audit, or the DRA, a responding state may use this form and checkbox to confirm non-marital birth born out of wedlock and confirm paternity establishment of a child in an intergovernmental case. OCSE auditors will request supporting documentation if the information provided is inconsistent or contradictory, or if the form is incomplete or blank. In most cases, if you've checked paternity established or parentage established, you would also check yes for was this parentage establishment a paternity determination of fatherhood. An example of when you might check no is a case where parentage is established for 2 women, as parentage for this family would not meet federal requirements for a paternity determination of fatherhood. Enter the date and the state in which paternity was established and the method used, for example, by order or by an acknowledgment of parentage. If parentage has not been established, of course, that box would be checked.
Thank you, Jeanette. We'd like to open it up again once we've been through that form and see if there are any questions that anyone would like to ask. We did get a question, written question, about the difference between the confidential information form and the personal information form for UIFSA 311, and hopefully we're getting to that and addressing that as we go through. Certainly the confidential information form is about helping a responding state set up a case, and the personal information form for UIFSA 311 includes the requirements under UIFSA when filing a UIFSA action. So if the operator could open the lines again briefly and see if we have anyone wishing to ask a question.
Thank you. Again, as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, you may press *1 and record your name. Again, that's *1 and record your name if you have a question.
We also have a question online about how does a state know, or if a state has EDE available to them. And it's my understanding, and someone can jump in and help out here, but that if you have the EDE application in your state and you're using it, that through the application you would know what other states are also available to exchange documents through EDE.
Yes, Bill, that's correct. There's a drop-down in the application that shows the states, I believe.
Right. So we'll give it another minute and see if anybody has any questions they wish to ask before we jump into the next form.
Yeah, and we do have some questions through the phone. First one comes from Carol Morgan. Your line is open.
I had a question regarding the form regarding paternity, slide 4. In some other states, a man's name on the birth certificate is a presumption that paternity has been determined or parentage. So is it appropriate to check off other and put per the intergovernmental quick section that applies and a paternity affidavit wouldn't be needed?
So the
go ahead, Bill.
well, I was thinking that an individual's name on the birth certificate was actually. So which state has that? Because I'm not sure that's. I'm not familiar with that, I guess.
Well, Florida, for one thing, on Intergovernmental Referral Guide or Reference Guide, determines on their state website that if a man's name is on the birth certificate, then an acknowledgement of paternity isn't necessary, and then dad's name on a birth certificate resolves all issues regarding paternity.
Bill, I can speak to that. This is Jeanette, just from the standpoint of being the supervisor of the Colorado Central Registry for a number of years. All states have the law that say in order to get a father's name on the birth certificate in a child born out of wedlock, it must either be done by order or by acknowledgement of parentage. So at least in Colorado, if we received another state's birth certificate with the father's name on it, we considered that established. We very often got cases asking us to determine that a different man was the father, and our response was that first birth certificate, that man had to be determined not to be the father because the Colorado didn't have jurisdiction over the other state's birth certificate. So that would be how I'd respond to that.
Okay. Sometimes I have cases where in one state a man's name on a birth certificate is considered a determination of paternity, but the state you're sending it to, they don't have that requirement and they require an order. So it really would go by whatever the state the child was born in as to what their regulations dictate, wouldn't it? Instead of the state you're sending the registration to?
Well, that would be my response. Does anybody else want to jump in? Again, I don't think a third state has or a responding state has the authority to essentially disestablish paternity or disestablish or take a name off a birth certificate. If a man's name was on a Colorado birth certificate, that could be addressed in Colorado, but not in another state.
Okay.
Jeanette, this is Ann Miller in OCSE, and I agree with what you're saying. It would be the state where parentage was established. If it's that state's laws that determine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So in terms of the form, you might just have to say under other that dad's name's on the birth certificate, and you don't know how it was on there. If it was a different state, not your own, that you can find that out.
Right.
And there's an online question that's related, asking about documentation of paternity and such, and I think you would still need and want to send the information that supported the paternity, whether it's just the birth certificate or whatever was applicable. Are there other questions?
Yes, our next question comes from Artish Jacobs. Your line is open.
Hi, yes, I have a question in regards to the parentage on slide 4. For the same-sex marriage, would you check adoption or other? Because I don't recall hearing what box you would check.
Very good question.
This is Ann Miller at OCSE. It would depend on your state's law and how parentage is established in your state for same-sex couples. And if it is by adoption, you would select that. There are some states that are moving to allow acknowledgments of parentage for same-sex couples, and so in that case, it would be the acknowledgement. But it is determinant of your own state's law.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we'll close the lines again, please, and move on to the next form, the personal information form for UIFSA 311, and we'll have some time for questions after that form.
Thanks, Bill. And I know there were some questions about the differences between the two, so hopefully this will answer a bit of that, and if not, we can do that at the end. So as we said, in response to comments, OCSE developed a new personal information form for UIFSA Section 311. That section details the information that must be provided to the tribunal in a child support action. Section 311 requires that the petition or pleading or accompanying documents include certain identifying information regarding the individual parties and the children. Unless accompanied by a nondisclosure finding or affidavit, the personal information form for UIFSA Section 311 is filed with the responding tribunal and is disclosed to the other party. The personal information form for UIFSA Section 311 is a required form if the Uniform Support Petition, the Declaration in Support of Establishing Parentage, and or the general testimony are sent to another jurisdiction. The personal information form for UIFSA Section 311 records the PII required by UIFSA Section 311, eliminating repetition of the information on the other intergovernmental forms. While this form is similarly intended to safeguard the privacy of individuals in an intergovernmental case, its use and handling differ from the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form. The personal information form for UIFSA 311 may be used in 4D as well as non-4D intergovernmental child support cases. The checkbox to indicate that a non-disclosure finding or affidavit is attached has been moved from the note section to right under the title for emphasis. A non-disclosure finding or affidavit, as Debbie mentioned, is the mechanism used per UIFSA Section 312 to request that certain information not be disclosed to the other party because the health, safety, or liberty of a party or child would be jeopardized by disclosure of specific identifying information. This requires the responding tribunal to seal the information, which also may not be provided to the other party unless and until the tribunal holds a hearing and requires disclosure. The next line on the form states that this form contains sensitive information. Do not file this form in a public access file. As mentioned earlier, comments noted that there was a risk of identity theft, as some courts are open under state law, allowing public access to the hearing and court records. This form is intended to safeguard the privacy of individuals. Because the form records information that may pose significant risk of identity theft, if disclosed inappropriately, the form highlights that it should not be filed in a public access file. OCSE, however, recognizes that states vary in whether court proceedings, as well as the files and records in those proceedings, are open to the general public. OCSE believes that consolidating the PII required by UIFSA into a single form will assist state tribunals in safeguarding the privacy of intergovernmental child support parties and their children. Let's look now at the specific sections of the form. Section 1 asks for the basic case information, identifying the name and case or tribunal numbers of the initiating responding jurisdictions, as we saw with the previous form. Section 2 provides information about the parties that must be provided to the tribunal in a child support action. Again, the parent information is listed side by side, followed by the caretaker information, as we saw on the previous form. Section 3 is used to provide information about the child or children for whom child support is owed or being sought. There's room on the form to provide information for 3 children, and again, we're only showing the first child, and you would attach the additional information if there are more than 3 children. With one exception, the form asks only for information that UIFSA Section 311 requires. The form also asks for the date the child began residing in his or her current state. That information is needed to determine the child's home state as defined by UIFSA, a designation which may be needed by the tribunal in certain UIFSA actions. For example, the child's home state might be relevant in determining the forum that has jurisdiction when there are simultaneous proceedings under UIFSA, and that's under Section 204 of UIFSA. Turning it back to you, Bill.
Thank you, Jeanette. We'd like to ask the operator to open the lines again briefly, and we've been through the new forms, 2 new forms, and see if you have any questions you'd like to ask at this time.
Again, as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name. We do still have questions in the queue from last session. Would you like to take those first?
Sure.
Perfect. The first question comes from Sultana Randall. Your line is open.
Hi. Hi. So I just wanted to confirm that basically, whether it be the first or the second form that you just went over, that either of those forms needed to be submitted to the second jurisdiction for any case action, whether it be limited services or quick locate, or basically either one, because the private information has been removed from all of the forms. Is that correct?
That's a good question, and almost correct. As we look at each of the forms, you'll see that some of them have instructions that one of those forms must be attached, and some of them have a checkbox that you can attach it. So it depends on whether the responding agency would need that information to take the action that you need. For instance, if you're sending them a transmittal to and you know their case number and you know that's correct and you've got the names of the parties on the transmittal to, you might not need to include that. So
okay.
The Child Support Confidential Agency form always goes with the transmittal one, and the PII form for the tribunal always goes with the forms that would be filed with the court. And the exception is the letter of transmittal regarding registration, and when we talk about that one, we'll show you that some of that information was left on that form. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Patterson Paulson. Your line is open.
I actually was just going to address the Florida paternity question. I'm from Florida, if they wanted that handled.
Go ahead.
If you look at the IRG, most states say that usually they give a date that as of this date, a father's name on the birth certificate is proof of paternity because of the paternity acknowledgement that everybody was required to implement. So if you look at IRG for Florida, it will say that the father's name on the birth certificate does equal paternity, but it also goes on to explain that as of 7/1/97, when we had the paternity acknowledgement, after that date, the only way you can get a father's name on the birth certificate is through court order of marriage or that acknowledgement. So prior to that, somebody could just name a person in the hospital. So that's typically how I've seen most of the IRGs explained that way. So when you see that, if you continue reading through the paternity section of the IRG, you'll probably get more explanatory information about the circumstances where that is impacted.
Thank you. We appreciate that clarification.
Yeah, that's a good point, Patterson. And I think one of the issues is that on the IRG, that first question is just a yes or no radial button.
Yes, it is.
Sometimes they stop reading when they read the no, and that's a good point to keep reading.
So when are you going to redo that?
That's another work group.
That's all I had.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Yep. Next question comes from Tammy Larson. Your line is open.
Okay, my question is regarding cultural marriage versus legal marriage. We're getting more and more families where they're culturally married versus legally married, and then we have to determine if we're going to do a paternity action because the children are not necessarily born within a legal marriage. Just wondering if other people have the same situation happening.
Obviously, your state laws would have an impact on those sorts of determinations and decisions, but if anyone else has any comments.
Yeah, I would have said the same thing.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe time for one more question if it's out there.
Very good. Next question comes from Lindsay Bloom. Your line is open.
Yeah, I just want to be clear on this. With the Child Support Agency confidential sheet versus the PII form, if it's a registration of an order that we've already established, all we want the other state to do is enforce it. Are you saying that the PII wouldn't be required then?
The one that goes to the tribunal?
The one that you're saying would be filed with it's the only document
right.
You're saying that would be filed with the court.
That is correct, because you'll notice that when we get to that letter of transmittal for the registration, what used to be the registration statement, the information that you are required to file is on that form.
Okay, so then you don't have to have CII with that.
You always need the one for the child support agency to go with your transmittal one, but you may not need the one for the tribunal if an order has already been established.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and once the case is established, I'm not sure you always need the confidential information form either, since the responding jurisdiction has already set up their case and has most of that information already.
Right, once you've sent that initial, you're typically not sending another transmittal one.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. I think Jeanette's going to continue now. If we want to close the lines and continue and talk about the transmittal number 1.
Correct. So we're going to call this the T1 just to make it easier. Provides a standard format for an initiating agency, a 4D child support agency, to request another 4D agency in a responding jurisdiction to open an intergovernmental case and take certain actions. This form is intended only for use among 4D agencies. It is not designed for private intergovernmental cases. Generally, the T1 is not a legal document to file with the tribunal, although it may be filed with the tribunal and may be disclosed to the parties in the case in some states, unless accompanied by a nondisclosure finding or affidavit. In the work group, we found that at least one state has a state law that requires the filing of the transmittal. The T1 required some changes to reflect that the form is an agency-to-agency form. We also replaced certain words with current terminology and deleted references to controlling order, since cases with valid multiple current support obligations should now be very rare. Please note that the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form must be attached when using this form. The header record was changed to be consistent across all the intergovernmental forms, as we've discussed. This is the first form where you see all 3 note items that we discussed earlier, including the checkboxes that indicate that a nondisclosure finding or affidavit is attached, that the form was sent through the EDE, or that this request for information was sent via SysNet. Unless a response has been received, it's not necessary to send a document using more than one method. However, with the T1, most states will require the document in addition to the SysNet transaction when you're asking initially for them to set up an intergovernmental case. Section 1 on the slide describes the action the initiating jurisdiction is requesting. The introductory language clarifies that the actions relate to a 4D intergovernmental case, commonly referred to as a traditional 2-state case. The initiating jurisdiction is requesting the responding jurisdiction to provide all appropriate services. You may notice that this section differs quite a bit from the old form. The work group wanted to ensure that this important communication between agencies is clear in terms of what action the initiating jurisdiction is requesting. There are 5 actions on the T1, including an option for other if needed. The other 4 actions are establish parentage. The second is establish and enforce an order and forward payment to the initiating jurisdiction's SDU, which is the State Disbursement Unit. The third is take an action on the responding tribunal's order and forward payment to the initiating jurisdiction's SDU. And the fourth, take an action on a support order of another jurisdiction, and again, forward payment to the initiating jurisdiction's SDU. We've also included the number 5, other, with room for an explanation if your state is requesting another type of action from the responding jurisdiction when it opens an intergovernmental case. We're not going to discuss each sub-box, but we would like to highlight some of the key points. First, if a modification is being requested, please be sure that the responding jurisdiction is the jurisdiction with continuing exclusive jurisdiction, or CEJ, to complete the modification. Also, actions 3 and 4 have an option to request modification only. This would typically be used when the obligee is in the responding jurisdiction and that jurisdiction has CEJ to modify, but the initiating jurisdiction does not request additional services. Action 3E is a request to change the person or entity that will receive the payments. This is used if there is a new obligee or the child is in foster care placement. Please note that redirection of payments has been removed from the T1 to eliminate confusion about requests to change the payment location under UIFSA Section 319, which are sometimes called redirection requests. A request for redirection under UIFSA Section 319 is not a request for the responding agency to open a traditional 4D intergovernmental case, and therefore is not an appropriate request for the T1. A request for payment forwarding is a payment processing action now on the Transmittal 3. And we'll discuss these actions when we discuss the T3 and the request for change of support payment location pursuant to UIFSA Section 319 forms. As the supervisor of the Colorado Center Registry, we received many intergovernmental cases with this section filled out incorrectly. One common error was marking all the actions, presumably because the caseworker wasn't sure what to mark. The second was marking enforce or modify the responding state's order when the order was issued by another state. Please complete Section 1 carefully to ensure success with your case. However, a case should not be returned because the initiating jurisdiction does not check a box for an action that the responding jurisdiction determines is appropriate. Contact the other agency if there's any question about what's being requested. Going on to Section 2, case summary, is of course a summary of the order or orders that exist for the parties, and you would refer to the order for additional information. For the breakdown of total amount of arrears, again, you would refer to the order and, if applicable, the letter of transmittal requesting registration and or the arrears calculation. New check boxes have been added, though, to clarify whether the order is for current support or arrears only. This section allows a 4D agency to include information about more than one order for current support. For example, there may be separate orders for different children involving the same obligor and obligee. The rarer situation will be multiple current support orders that have been improperly entered. The initiating jurisdiction may use this section to provide information about the multiple orders, and it should then check item number 5, other, under Section 1 action, and request that the responding jurisdiction determine the validity of the orders. This section also allows a 4D agency to include information about an arrears-only order. In some states, administrative orders for current child support are later superseded by a judicial order in the same state, such as a divorce decree, and that order does not recognize, incorporate, or modify the previous administrative order. While under state law, the judicial order controls current support, arrears accrued under the superseded administrative order and not included in the judicial order do remain collectible under the administrative order. This section allows the 4D agency to provide information about the enforceable arrears under the administrative order. It also allows a 4D agency to provide information about a money judgment for arrears or an order that only addresses support for a prior period. Can we go on to the next slide? Thank you. You'll certainly notice a big difference in Section 3 on this slide. Only the parties' names are listed, and all other information is on the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form. As discussed earlier, these changes were made to protect the PII. Section 3 and 4 have revised titles referring to obligee and obligor information rather than mother and father. New check boxes also ask whether the obligee is a parent or caretaker. If the obligee is a caretaker, there's space to indicate the person's relationship to the child or children and to check whether the caretaker has legal custody or guardianship, which is required by some jurisdictions. Section 5, dependent children or children information, has space to list the full legal names of the children. Again, the rest of the information is on the PII form. Section 6, other pertinent information, is used to provide additional information that might be useful to the responding jurisdiction. If that information relates to a previous section, it's helpful to identify the section and the item number. And if additional space is needed, check the box for continued on attached sheets incorporated by reference. Section 7, attachments, and in that section you would check the appropriate boxes to indicate all documents attached. For attachments other than those listed, just check Other Attachments and attach the documents. Note that the new Personal Information Form for UIFSA Section 311 and the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form have been added and terminology has been updated. Depending on the action you're requesting, you may need to include the PII for UIFSA 311, which we've talked about, if the documents need to be filed with a tribunal. Section 8, Contact Information, is used to provide the date the form is completed, a contact person's name, a direct telephone number, including extension if necessary, a fax number, and an email address to expedite communication between jurisdictions. As mentioned earlier, we highly recommend providing a direct number and email address to ensure success with your case. Of course, if a direct number is not available, then provide the best number possible. Back to you, Bill.
Thank you, Jeanette. We'd like to open it up again briefly if there are any questions about the T1.
Again, as a reminder to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name. We do have a question from Rick Morris. Your line is open.
Rick, are you on mute?
Here we are. Is that better now?
That's better, thank you.
Yeah, my people were here strangling me. No. This has nothing to do with Transmittal 1. This goes back to the PII, the one form there where we have the party's name and their Social Security number. And the problem is, it says this may be disclosed unless it's accompanied with a non-disclosure affidavit. I wonder if we could remove those Social Security numbers from that because, it's, in Maryland here, we're not supposed to give out Social Security numbers of the other parties involved, period, flat out. And I hate to see this, go to another state and somehow the other party get a hold of the other one's Social Security number.
And actually, the UIFSA Section 311 requires the Social Security number. So
what we'll do is non-disclosure on each and every transmittal?
Well, the person has to request it. I would say the agency can't just request that, but that might be another...
Well, we would have to really to comply with our confidentiality laws.
Anybody else want to chime in here?
This is Yvette Riddick, and you are correct in that Section 311, the pleading and accompanying documents section requires a Social Security number, so we're tied to that. The other piece is that in the many years that I have been working in the child support program, there has been a small movement to try and get rid of the Social Security number altogether, and unfortunately, we are unable to because of the way that the legacy systems, and there's so many of them, were built based on a Social Security number, which, of course, we all know that the program started way before internet and everything else. So our hands are tied, unfortunately, and so these forms are the best answer that we can give you at this time, and that's exactly why we did it, because there is a rise in concern about the number, but we are unable to get to eliminate it completely.
Okay, that's understandable.
Thank you.
Were there other questions?
I show no further questions in the queue.
I had one question about linking SESNET transactions to the actions on the T1, and I think a lot of those, even though there's been some changes to those, there are an awful lot of SESNET transactions that I think pretty well cover those, but I certainly don't have them off the top of my head. And then there's a question, I think, about the acknowledgement coming up, but we're going to be talking about the T1 acknowledgement here in just a moment. If there's no further questions, I think we'll proceed, and we'll have time for questions at the end.
And Bill, I might speak just a little bit to that about the SISNET transaction. Really, if you're asking a responding agency to open an intergovernmental case, you just want to send one SISNET transaction, because at least from the way they're received in Colorado, if you send 3 different SISNET transactions, that looks like 3 brand new cases that we have to research and then close a couple of them. So I'm not sure what the name of the transaction is, but you just need to send one when you're asking to open a intergovernmental case. Hopefully that answers that question. So we're now going to go on to that transmittal enforcement, the Child Support Enforcement Transmittal Acknowledgment. So the purpose of the T1 acknowledgement form is to provide, again, a standard format for informing the initiating jurisdiction of the responding jurisdiction's receipt of the transmittal one and to request any additional information or forms that are needed to take further action on the case. The form is intended, again, only for use among 4D agencies. This acknowledgement was previously included as part of the T1 initial request. The Intergovernmental Forms Work Group informed OCSE that most states had separated the T1 from the acknowledgement, and for this reason, OCSE developed a new standalone T1 acknowledgement form. The directions require the responding 4D agency to return the form to the initiating jurisdiction. As noted earlier, use of jurisdiction rather than state reflects the terminology now used on the T1 and other forms. The responding jurisdiction completes the acknowledgement and returns it to the initiating jurisdiction, selecting the appropriate responses. And I'll just go over briefly the responses that you might check. One would be that you receive the information and no additional information is necessary if everything is needed to process the case. You would check additional information needed if additional information or forms are needed to process the case, and of course indicate what information or forms are needed. Check the responding jurisdiction will proceed with administrative enforcement of the order without registration to inform the initiating jurisdiction that the responding agency is pursuing administrative enforcement of the order without first registering it. Section 507B of UIFSA states that the responding agency shall consider and, if appropriate, use any administrative enforcement procedures authorized under its law to enforce an order. Be aware, however, that the acknowledgement is usually completed by the central registry, and this decision may not be made until the case is being worked by the local office. And, of course, check the remarks response if additional information is being provided to the initiating agency. Check boxes for other documents related to paternity, divorce decree, assignment of rights, description of real property, and photograph of respondent were removed from the revised form. The work group indicated that such information is not needed in most cases and therefore is more appropriate to include with the other category. New checkboxes were added for the personal information form for UIFSA Section 311, the Child Support Agency Confidential Information Form, a birth certificate or birth record, and a nondisclosure finding or affidavit. To continue on this slide, we would check your case has been forwarded to Action 2 to identify the local office and caseworker to whom the caseworker has been forwarded, and then, of course, enter the information if known at the time. Specific caseworker information may not be available until the local office receives the case. You may also be filling out the acknowledgement before the case is transferred to a local office if additional information or forms are needed. At the bottom of the page, provide the date the form is completed, the name of the person completing the form, again a direct phone number, including extension if necessary, a fax number, and an email address to expedite communication between jurisdictions. If a direct number is not available, then provide the best number. We also realize, of course, that these acknowledgments may be sent via SysNet, and this paper form may not be needed on every case. And before we open up for questions, Debbie, I'm going to turn it over to you for one last slide, I think.
Thanks, Jeanette. Now, I want to talk about the effective date of the revised forms. We've had several questions about this. So you might be wondering when you'll be required to use these revised forms and when you might start receiving them. We know that some states have begun programming for the revised forms, so you might receive revised forms at any point if you haven't already. They are valid now. The deadline for the states to begin using the revised form is January 15, 2018. We knew that states would need time to program these changes. Until then, the old forms are still valid and should be honored. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Bill, and we're going to open it up for questions.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. That's the presentation today, and we have plenty of time here for some additional questions. If the operator would open the line for us, please.
Thank you. Again, as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Make sure your phone is unmuted and record your name clearly when prompted. If you need to withdraw your question, you may press *2. Again, that is *1 and record your name if you have a question. Our first one comes from Loretta. Your line is open.
Hi. Can you just explain a little bit about the redirect with this new changes and so forth?
Yeah, this is Jeanette. I'll probably take that one. You're talking about the redirection under Section 319?
Correct.
Yes. So all states now being under 2008, there is a Section 319 that, and we'll go into this in much greater detail in the following training session, but I'll go ahead and discuss it just a little bit. So if none of the parties live in the order issuing state, it allows another state where the obligee is receiving 4D services to ask the state that issued the order to essentially redirect where the money goes. So most states' orders say, for instance, in Texas, the payment should be sent to the Texas State Disbursement Unit. UIFSA Section 319 is designed to get that order issuing state out of the middle of payment processing so that another state can directly enforce the order. And as I said, we're going to talk far more about that in, I think it's session 3, where we really delve into detail on it. My experience has been that states are just starting to wade into this. Colorado's been doing it for quite some time, and the staff there can certainly answer questions about it. But other states are just kind of getting their feet wet and trying to determine how to do this.
So as far as like on the transmittal one, the initial request, is there anything there that we would have to indicate, or?
You wouldn't send a T1 in those cases.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And our next question comes from Lynette Dixie. Your line is open.
Hi, I have a question. It might be out of the realm, but we're thinking on Section 1, Number 3, we've been having situations where our customer has been requesting modification, but our judge has told us that they're full faith and credit orders, and our judge has indicated that they need to go back to the state to be modified. But in our situation, the state has already closed the case, and so we're at a road where we don't know whether to send them back or how we go about that. Can we use this transmittal to be able to do that action?
So let me just clarify. So one of the parties still lives in the order issuing state?
Yes, well, the situation is there, like if it comes from our, like the state of Idaho, and we acknowledge it and do a full faith and credit in our court,
okay. Then the obligor in your state requests a modification?
Yes.
Okay, so it would be Idaho that would do the modification because the obligee is still there. Right? Okay. So different states handle it differently. So what I would recommend is that you call the central registry or email the central registry in that state, in Idaho in this case, and say, okay, the obligor has requested modification. Do you just want the request or do you need additional forms? Because some states will just process it as part of the already in effect intergovernmental case, which is certainly would be my preference and a lot of people's preference. But some states do actually open a separate case just to process the modification. So I would just say contact the central registry and ask them what they need to proceed.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have additional questions?
Yes, next question comes from Carol Morgan. Your line is open.
Hi, I had a question regarding the acknowledgment transmittal. Sometimes we get electronic acknowledgments and then the paper one, and they match up okay, and we just make notes of it. But other times on some cases, and I was trying to pull up a sample on my alerts, but I couldn't find one for, this session. But we get electronic CESNet CSI notifications that have nothing to do with the case they're coming in under. And oftentimes when I check on Quick to match it up to something, it corresponds to one of the parties' other cases with totally different other people and children. And sometimes I get blank CESNets that don't even apply to the case that it's being sent on. Is there any reason for that or some way to stop it?
I think you'd have to reach out to the other jurisdiction and sort of try to coordinate with them of why they're sending those CESNet transactions. They apparently think that they want you to open a case or that you have an existing case on those parties as well.
It might also be that you're getting a CESNet on a proactive match from the Federal Case Registry, which is automated, happens behind the scenes in most states, I think. So, and I think those are what Colorado would have called a CSI. I'm not 100% sure of that. I've been out of there for a little while. So it might be that it really isn't related to the case you just sent them. It's just that they got notification through the Federal Case Registry that you now have a case open, and so you're getting that Federal Case Registry hit.
I was just wondering why it would match up to individuals that it's sent on, and it has to do with other parties and other children.
If a Federal Case Registry looks for any of the parties and says, hey, you have a case for this obligor, so do we with different people.
Oh, okay. So that's probably...
It's sort of a heads up to say this other state may have information that you need about one of the parties.
Okay.
This is Yvette Riddick, and I also know that our Division of Federal Systems, which is responsible for maintenance of Quick and CESNet and so forth, that every few years they will do what they call an interstate reconciliation analysis, because what happens over time is duplicate cases get opened in error with non-custodial parents with two different families, as you describe, and so forth. And we have a team of people within that division who do that work, and then we'll work with the state when they see matches that don't make sense to them. So we try to work with the states and provide them technical assistance when those things happen.
Thank you. Yvette, do we have any other questions on the phone?
Yes, next question comes from Wanda Denny. Your line is open.
Hi, this is Melinda Denny from Iowa. I want to go back to the CESNet question about whether or not they're going to be mapped to the new forms. You said that you thought that there was one for each form. They hadn't changed that much, but yet for registration and enforcement, there's 3 possible transactions you can send. So are we going to be told only send the one that says the state agency requested? Are we going to be told to send the one the NCP requested, the CP requested? I mean, and then that's the same thing for all the forms. Do you know if there's any actions going on to map the CESNet transactions to the forms?
I'm not aware of any efforts underway to change CESNet at this time. Maybe someone else?
Hi, Bill. This is Ann Miller at OCSE. It is being looked at, and as I've taken notes during this call, we will make sure to invite and hopefully have a CESNet person here at our next training call, since we're getting lots of questions on this topic. But I know they are looking closely at the new forms in planning for the future. So we'll have some folks here at the next call who can answer those questions.
Thank you. Yeah, it will help to be able to communicate via CESNet if they're mapped. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Melinda.
Next question comes from Amy Doring. Your line is open.
Hi, I have a question regarding the non-disclosure finding and affidavit checkbox that's on most of the forms. I'm calling from Michigan, and I'm not sure if anyone else is listening from here, but our non-disclosure findings are member-driven. So in other words, if I had a custodial parent who signed an affidavit to keep her information confidential from father number 1, it would actually be a non-disclosure for every case she is involved in. So there's not necessarily a separate document for, let's say, every case. And it could also travel through if the child was becomes an adult, and when the case was open when the person was a child, there was a non-disclosure finding. So oftentimes I check that box, but I can't actually provide a document, and I have no idea how other states are looking at that. And then we try a workaround of using our office address for a custodial parent address, and I mean, it gets kind of messy, and it leaves us open to concern with respect to what other states are disclosing.
So you actually have a finding for that individual from the court of non-disclosure under UIFSA?
Or an affidavit. We could have an affidavit for that person, but it could, let's say, be from a different gentleman that she wishes her information kept confidential. But since our system's member-driven, it makes everything that she's involved in confidential, every case.
And I think that's not uncommon. Colorado's system is the same way.
Okay, so what do you guys just check
and that's a really good question. I never really thought about it. We never questioned if the other state said there was non-disclosure. We would, as the responding agency, mark our case with non-disclosure. But maybe somebody else can chip in who doesn't have that member-driven.
Well, and are we sometimes talking about family violence indicator as opposed to a finding of non-disclosure? I think those are a little bit different.
Yeah, our family violence indicators, if we flag them in our system, it immediately marks an address confidential that will not print on any of our forms except for the UIFSA ones, which then we either manipulate or tell you it's a non-disclosure.
Okay, but it's a non-disclosure is, again, a little bit different than a family violence indicator, and you actually have a finding or an affidavit, finding from the court or an affidavit, and then you would send that documentation.
We don't always have that. We could have the affidavit from the mother and one father, but that will be member-driven and make it confidential for all. Or we have a PPO between one mother and one father, but her information then in our system is flagged confidential regardless of who is involved in her future cases or whatever next case comes along. So I guess
the theory behind that, Bill, is if her information gets published in an open court with some other obligor, the first obligor could get access to it.
Right.
So that might be one we want to think about and maybe craft an answer to as a group, but I think it's definitely a concern.
Right. Good question.
Thank you.
We have a little bit of time left. Is there another question out there? And I will say that for questions submitted in the Q&A, and if we haven't addressed those, we certainly will. Any other questions over the phone at this time?
Yes, we have a few in queue still. Next one comes from Jesse Archibald. Your line is open.
Hello. Our question is actually in the queue, and when you know that the responding tribunal does a court process, are you required to submit both the CIF and the PIF for the UIFSA Section 311 requirement, or just one, the PIF?
So, go ahead, Bill.
The confidential information form, if you're sending it to the responding jurisdiction for the first time, they're going to need that to build their case. But if you're requesting a UIFSA action and they'll be having to file action in court, then you're going to have to send the 311 along with that because that's required under UIFSA. So for the most part, a new Transmittal 1, you would be sending both initially.
Right,
okay. Unless
you're asking them to enforce their own order.
Right.
Okay, that answers the question. I had one other question not related. I heard a comment that all states were now under UIFSA 2008, and I know for a long time that there was a 1994 UIFSA states and I think a 2001 UIFSA states. So I wasn't clear on when the change came about, and is that in fact correct that all states now are under UIFSA 2008? I just want to clarify that. Thanks.
Yes, it is.
Yep. All states were required to implement that by April 1st of 2016, I believe.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. We might have time for one more question over the phone.
Yep, and our last question in queue comes from Terry Clark. Your line is open.
Hello?
Are you muted, Terry?
It's probably. Can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay. My name's Terry Clark from South Carolina. I have a question about PII again. In other words, my question is, which form would be better used when you have a non-disclosure request would you be better to use the 311 or the other one? And then also, let's say you sent the wrong one. Is there any requirement for the responding jurisdiction to redact?
Jeanette?
My answer would be if you sent the wrong one, the responding jurisdiction should ask for what they need. So that's what I would do as the responding jurisdiction. The whole point of marking the affidavit or the finding on there is that the tribunal or the agency still needs the information, but that prevents it from being disclosed to the other party or filed in a public access file. So it's not that you don't do the form, it's that it's important to mark that there is a non-disclosure affidavit or finding.
Okay, and that can be done with either of the PII forms.
Right.
Okay, that was it. Thank you.
Thank
Bill,
you
I
very
think
much.
there's one in queue that I could really, a written one that I could answer really easily. Someone asked, does the initiating agency have to send an acknowledgement along with the T1? And the response is no. Part of the reason for separating it is that the responding agency can then generate it from their document generation system rather than having to complete it by hand.
Right.
So that we could easily get that answer out there.
Thank you, Jeanette. And we are winding down on time a little bit. I wanted to let you know that if we didn't get to your question, we certainly will, and also provide an email address for you to submit further questions, and that is ocse.dpt@acf.hhs.gov. And so we thank you very much for attending today, and we look forward to you at the next sessions, and thank you very much for all the great work you do.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.